Hi, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and this week I'm with Brendan Keefe, the chief investigative reporter at WXIA, Tegna station in Atlanta, and we are talking TV. Hi, Brendan.
Hi, it's good to be here, Michael.
It's really good to have you. I'm so glad you were here today. We met, just to kind of put some context in our conversation today, we met in the course of a how-to piece that we're producing on your work, how to produce a great story working solo, great news story, because you do so much of that. As the shelf of Emmys and various awards behind you is groaning, attesting to that. You do really great investigative work. And I wanted to have the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about, we had been talking about the news kind of getting stuck in a rut in many senses, especially in local news, and how easy it is to kind of cling to conventions. At TVNewsCheck, we're always looking for ways in which people are disrupting the news. And your work is a great example of that, that you're doing on all sorts of levels there. So I was kind of hoping you could share a few tips today with people watching and listening to the podcast. Starting with just ways in which, for instance, day turn stories, which it's hard to be creative there, and many a news director laments there's just not room for creativity. But you argue otherwise. There are lots of ways to do that. So maybe you can talk a little bit, starting with that, just how in your own work you can be inventive in that format.
Well, first off, you have to say, what's our audience? Who are we serving? And where's the demand? I mean, there is a market demand for information, for journalism. And even though this is a craft, it's also a business. And I don't mean that in a money-making way. I mean, someone saying, you guys just do these news stories for ratings is like walking into a restaurant and saying, you only make this food so people will come here and buy it. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, yeah, of course we want our work to be viewed. We want, the ratings are just an example of how many people are consuming it. And guess what? Fewer and fewer people are watching local news. And then we have to ask why, because this is a trend over time, because people have more options. When I started in this field 30 years ago, the internet was something that only the Defense Department and universities used. I had to fight to get an email address on my business card in 1994 because it was unheard of. So there really were only 3 or 4 TV stations in every town. DVDs didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. And so basically we had a captive audience. And it was a pie sliced 3 very large, or 4 slices big. And those were some pretty hefty slices. It was a license to print money. Now, they're more than one pie. Forget the number of slices to the pie. People can go off and do other things with their time. And so we've, first in the 90s, you started to see this move towards sort of faster, quicker, sort of more slick storytelling that was more selling the sizzle than the steak. And then you also saw this sort of stunt journalism. I personally had to escape from a sinking car for 2 stories. I was attacked by a dog on live television. I mean, we were doing sort of circus acts, which was not journalism. Now what we've discovered is actually there's a market demand for 2 things. There's a market demand for right now on my phone, what's happening in the world so I can scroll through the headlines. Just give me the Twitter version of the story. And then the other market is for long form or creative storytelling. Explain things to me and offer context, offer some way for me to take something as complex as COVID and understand it and sort of how I can apply it to my life. And documentary storytelling, long form storytelling. Here's what there's no market for. There is absolutely zero market demand for a 15-second news story, what we call a VO or a VOSOT that's 20 seconds. No one says, they say, oh, did you see Game of Thrones last night? Yeah, it was incredible. Did you see 60 Minutes last night? Oh, yeah, it was amazing. Did you see that VOSOT on Channel 4? That 15-second VOSOT moved me. No, they don't do that. And there's also, I would argue, no market for the minute 30 news story.
And yet that's the foundation of so many local
It's what Because you know what, we're McDonald's. People wanted French fries for so many decades. We're still making French fries when maybe they want something else. They want the sort of fast casual Panera or something to that effect. Maybe that's the analogy. But we're not serving that up. We're not bringing that to people. And we're trying to hold on to these sort of sands through the hourglass, trying to save these last viewers, instead of saying, wait, why aren't we trying to get the audience that's out there, meet them where they already are? And the way to do that is actually not going out and doing the classic news gathering of let's go get 5 interviews. Maybe it's just an explainer. Here's how the COVID spreads, or here's how the vaccine works. What a much better use of our time. And you can do it in a creative way that's sort of a spoonful of sugar that helps the information go down in terms of a visual storytelling. Invest your time in that. Even for a day turn, I've done it myself. I don't go and interview 4 experts on the story. What I'll do is actually come up with an explainer where I'm on camera in a visual way, just explaining how something complex works. Now, it takes a little bit of research. You have to understand it, but I'd much rather invest 2 to 3 hours in that than 5 hours racing all over town to collect 8-second sound bites.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, and one of the things that sets your work apart too, you just touched on it for a second, the visual aspect of it, that's visual storytelling. And we need to think more about that, because visually we see a lot of local TV that's not very interesting at all. It's not framed very well. It's not. Now you are using a lot of different, an arsenal of cameras. You're a drone pilot for your station. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the aesthetic sensibility you bring to a story when you're framing it up originally?
Yeah, it's really frustrating when I do training because people want to do, because I teach, people want me to give them this sort of paint by numbers. Here's how to do a great news story. It sort of reminds me of that scene in Dead Poets Society when Mr. Keating, Robin Williams says, is talking about J. Evans Pritchard and his here's how to measure a poem, by the meter and the rhyme. And instead of the sort of enjoying the poem for the intent and the emotion that you feel, you cannot teach storytelling or any visual storytelling or written storytelling in sort of a paint by numbers way. Where it gets hard is after 30 years, it's hard for me not to retread old tires, to say, oh, okay, this is your classic story on a mayor's news conference, and I know exactly what I'm going to do, and it's going to look no different than the story I did 20 years ago. I try to make every single one of my stories look different than everyone else's, but also different from any other story I've ever done. That gets really hard when you've done thousands of stories. And that's why I want the viewer to watch and go, wait, this is new, this is fresh, I haven't seen this before. Because we have a tendency to go to this paint by numbers. We have 2 anchors, and I've used this example so many times. This is every local TV news show in America, except where I work, except for Tegna, where they start with a male anchor says, good evening, there's this amazing video we're not showing you. And then female anchor says, that's right, Bob, it's amazing video and it's incredible. It was all caught on tape, even though we haven't used tape for 20 years. And then it cuts to a reporter in the field. Let's go to the reporter in the field who's got that amazing video we still haven't shown you. And then the reporter goes, that's right, I'm here at the gas station. It was recorded on that surveillance camera right behind me. And wait till you see it because it was extraordinary video. And then they roll a story. And the first thing in the story, guess what? It's not the amazing video. It's a soundbite from a witness. We're still doing eyewitness news from the 70s. And God bless Al Primo who invented it, but we now have video. Why are we talking to someone describing what they saw? We still haven't shown you the video. Mm-hmm. We do this all the time where we have 3 people describe what you're about to see, and then we still don't even show it to you. Mm-hmm. Instead of start with the video, then show the video again, then show it again in slow-mo, and then break it down and analyze it, and then maybe have the analysis or the witness on the back end. Again, there's no sort of rote way to do this, or there shouldn't be. But the problem is we're following this computerized rundown that says we always start with 2 anchors. Then we go to the live shot reporter standing at the scene where nothing is currently happening. So why are we live? And then we're like, yes, he's live through the magic of television. He's live on the scene. When people can go live from their phone
There's
now.
a live fetish that still exists, isn't there?
Still exists. And people, my 11-year-old goes live from her phone all the time. So why in the world do we think this is some, selling point? We have to break these chains of sort of just repetitive, go out there and make widgets. We're a widget factory, and we have to get away from that, because here's the thing, and this is the secret that people will tell you in TV news, is we don't watch our programs unless we have to. We don't watch our shows. Why don't we watch our shows? Because they're unwatchable. Unless you're, pinned to, you're bedridden. Why in the world would you sit and watch 5 hours of news a day when it's simply the same thing over and over again? And that's the chain we have to break.
Okay, so, and I don't think many people would disagree with any of these assertions, but fresh eyes, that's tough. That's tough to bring. For example, you brought up a mayor's press conference, which we see in almost every newscast every day. Just give us an example through your own eyes. You walk into that scenario, you're doing a day turn story on a press conference, which is visually perhaps one of the dullest things that visual storytelling is tough to do. So when you're walking into that room, when you're in those environs, what are you starting to look at that's going to give us a fresh take, some different vantage point in a moment like that?
You hit the nail on the head, because if you think about it, what producer, and I'm going to get to your news conference, but you brought up this sort of issue of how we're all of the cameras are in the same position in the news conference. So we're all going to show the same video. If there were 3 fast food restaurants in a corner and they were all serving exactly the same burger, why would you go to one over the other? Or why would you go to any of them if they're all serving the same mundane burger? But producers never get in trouble for having what every other station has. Producers get in trouble for not having what every other station has. Imagine any other business. Imagine a car manufacturer where they would punish the designers for not having the identical vehicle as the other competitors. It makes no sense. So what I would do in the news conference is take a totally different vantage point to start. I would also use more than one camera. I might take, the GoPro and a clamp and stick it, in a wide shot of the room. I might put it there before everybody files in. Is it a large meeting where there's going to be other people there? It might be helpful to have a time lapse of the capacity crowd coming to that mayor's news conference because of this new policy that's being announced. I might also then usually, and I say usually, even though there's no paint by numbers to this, you want to listen to what the mayor's saying in the news conference and say, wait a second, the mayor's talking about a neighborhood and we're not even in that neighborhood. We're talking about this new development in this neighborhood. Immediately, I'm going to go to that neighborhood. And the first shot in that story and the last shot in that story are going to be the neighborhood. And we're going to be hearing from real people in the neighborhood. And the mayor's news conference is going to be, if at all, in the middle somewhere of the story explaining this policy, maybe for a brief soundbite. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of get out of the meeting, get out of the news conference. This is not new, but then how do we tell the story in a creative way? And depending on what the mayor's saying, a little light bulb's going to go off and say, you know what, this sounds crazy, but what if we went and we actually told the story this way with, we're going to buy 4 basketballs because they're redoing this park, and we're going to use the basketballs to show the disbursement of money. 1/4 of the money is coming from this budget and 1/4 of the money is coming from the federal government or something.
By the time we get to that, are we still talking about feasible in a day turn story, or are we looking at the next day now for a broader contextual perspective?
Well, it depends when the news conference is. If your deadline's at 5 and the news conference is at 4:30, then you've got a soundbite from the mayor and you're done. Mm-hmm. Now, if the news conference is at 10 a.m. and I have the rest of the day, then that's going to be a time budget of how can I go and expand this? It'll also be fascinating, and we've done this at Tegna with what we've done with sort of our Verify road trip series. We'll actually take an average citizen into the news conference with us. When I say average citizen, we'll take someone who's going to be affected by this policy change, bring them into the mayor's news conference. Especially if you know a day ahead of time, the mayor's going to announce this new policy. They're bulldozing houses in this section of Atlanta to put up a new development. Well, let's bring someone who lives in one of those houses and have them ask the questions of the mayor. Now we've got some compelling television, but also we're doing a service. We're amplifying a smaller voice and giving someone a seat at the table to be able to ask, a constituent of the mayor being able to ask the mayor why he or she is doing that. That's a much better news story, and it's much better use of our incredible reach and power that we still have, even though it is a fraction of what it was when I started 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, part of this whole, the creative endeavor is good time management and being able to to have your projects laid out. You're always working on several projects ahead, lining things up, and you are a master at time management. So I wonder if you can impart a little bit of advice on how a reporter should be structuring his or her day to accommodate creativity.
There's a saying in TV news, and it's much older than I am even, which is hurry up and wait. We're used to, in journalism, rushing to a scene and then waiting. We're all really good at sitting in places with no chairs, for example, leaning against walls or sometimes each other while we're waiting for one thing or another. So we think of this business as being, and this craft, sorry, let me mute that for you. We think of this craft and this business as being, running all the time, but actually there is downtime that can be utilized. Just for example, today, right now, I this morning attended my daughter's 5th grade graduation. While I'm there, part of the stage collapsed and teachers caught it, saving the student. I happen to have video of it, got video from the dad, interviewed the kid. That's going to be in the 5 o'clock news. That's while I'm at a family event. Well, I didn't leave my daughter alone. I made sure that she was celebrated, but a news happened in front of me. Then I'm putting together a 6 o'clock story that's a preview of my 11 o'clock investigation that's later going to be in our sort of local version of 60 Minutes called The Reveal. All of that is today, while right when we started this call, I had to ask you to wait for a minute because I was analyzing body camera video from a police shooting to help our executive producer and our assistant news director understand what they were seeing based on my experience covering body cameras and law enforcement. So all of that's in a single day. I also did a mandatory hour-and-a-half training today in the middle of all of this. And so you're asking, okay, well, where's the time management part? It just sounds like you're busy. The time management is right now I'm downloading that body camera while I'm talking to you, because I've got to wait. I've already looked at 2 of the body cameras, but there's 14 of them and they're multiple gigs. So I'm using some of the bandwidth, literally and figuratively right now, to download that body camera video while I'm doing something else.
So it's a very holistic way of working.
Yeah. And I think it's not, there is no such thing as multitasking. I mean, I'm ADD, so I can only focus on one thing at a time. Multitasking is really microtasking. You're doing something and then you're going back to this, but you're really only doing one thing at a time. I think it's a myth, but you can do things in parallel, because working with a multi-person crew, you do things sort of in parallel versus working alone, you do things in series. So for example, driving the car and logging the video or writing the web story can be done in parallel with a 2-person crew. Working alone, those 2 things have to be done one after the other. You can't be driving the car and writing a story. What you can be doing is driving the car, and in the back seat on the laptop, the video is loading. These days I'm shooting 4K video from multiple cameras. I can have that video loading into the computer, so by the time I get back home or to the station, the video is already loaded and I don't have to wait for it. Or I could be making calls, doing pre-interviews over a hands-free device while I'm driving. While I'm exporting video from the timeline as the editor, I can also be writing the web story. And so it's about sort of stealing back that time and doing things in parallel while you're sort of waiting for that progress bar to complete.
Just lastly, I want to ask you about the tools that you use too, because you're undaunted by this array of tools. As I mentioned earlier, you're the drone pilot for your station. You have an arsenal of cameras that you bring to your work. And a lot of people would be intimidated by embracing this tech, and you're not. You're always assimilating new tools into what you're doing. So can you just talk a little bit to how the attitude you bring to that and how a reporter should be thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we tend to look at TV equipment as only available from B&H, in New York. And by the way, that's my favorite candy store to go to, 33rd Street and 9th Avenue, to go into B&H and look at all their great stuff. But sometimes a piece of my equipment is at the checkout at Home Depot. It's an LED flashlight that I will use to highlight text with my phone. I'll video the text with my phone and use the flashlight obliquely to sort of highlight the section of text I want to show in the story. And I'll shoot that right here on the desk while I'm editing. I tend to embrace the concept that Dave Luigi does, our the CEO of Tegna, in that Dave says that we live in a 21st century world with our 21st century phones, and then we walk into our TV stations and we return back to the 20th century where phones didn't have cameras and do all these things. When you talk to a reporter who doesn't shoot their own video and you say, hey, yes, we'd like you to get an interview. And they're like, I don't even know how to do that. But they'll make a video on their phone all the time. They'll make a video on vacation. They can shoot selfies and frame them properly on vacation. They can get a sequence of wide, medium, and tight. They can tell a story on TikTok. Again, my 11-year-old can tell amazing stories on TikTok. What's the difference? The difference is adults are afraid to try new things and children aren't. When I gave my daughter, handed her my iPad when she was 2, when it first came out, she was pinch zooming within seconds. She didn't have to read any instructions. She just started tapping things and moving things until they did something. Most of the time, it didn't do what she wanted, but she learned from, oh, wait, I did that and it did something else. Let me remember that. That's how we all learned as children. We're now terrified as as adults rather, of pressing the wrong button on the keyboard. That if I press the wrong button, something bad is going to happen. Or if I try, it's going to fail. And so what we do is we have this resistance to any kind of learning by error and then saving that error because the error is actually something we're going to want to do later. Right. Shooting on your phone is a good example. The camera on this phone is, in a lot of ways, with these 3 lenses, basically wide, medium, and tight, is better than the camera I was shooting with professionally 2 years ago. So yes, it doesn't have the extended zoom and I can plug a mic into it, but that's pretty much it. I intermix phone video in my stories all the time and no one notices. It's sort of that best camera you have on you at the time. The other thing though, is you really do need to learn the basics, particularly of photography, rule of thirds, depth of field, sequencing, good sound, how to get good sound, proper composition. Those things can be really, really helpful.
For text and graphic overlays.
Get negative space, leaving a space where you're going to put things off to the side. And sometimes I have to remind myself, one of the things I do just on my phone, for example, is I have it set up. And all the best photographers do, by the way, is the guides. If you look here, I'm just trying to get some contrast there. You see the guides is those 4 points is where you want to put that. Those are your thirds, your vertical thirds and your horizontal thirds. Every photographer has those guides turned on in their phone so that if I'm going to frame myself or frame someone else, I'm going to frame them over one of those 4 points. And it's going to be a much more appealing shot on my phone. You can give someone the best camera, but the best camera, as they say, is the one you have on you. And if you have those guides set up, it's not a cheat. It's the best photographers do this, and they're going to have really compelling video and photographs out of something that may not be designed solely as a camera.
Well, on that note, because you are a fountain of good advice, and I think just the level of energy that you bring to the conversation is clear. And the question is, why isn't this shared more broadly across the industry by reporters at stations everywhere in this country? So
yeah, you've got to give back. I mean, that's look, I'm here standing on the shoulders of giants, of people who came before me, who sort of learned all these things and taught me. I remember being an intern where they sent me into the WFSB newsroom to get the tape stretcher. And I walked in and said, yeah, the guy says he has a 5-second shot, but only a 3-second clip. Does anybody know where the tape stretcher is? Of course, there's no tape stretcher. I was the intern getting pranked. Right. But I learned from these greats, and now I have to give back too. And I think we all do, but we just don't talk enough. We're one of the only industries that doesn't do R&D. We're a technology industry, and we don't do research and development. Mm-hmm. And by the time we approve a budget for a new piece of equipment, there's already a new version out. Yeah. We were just talking in our drone meeting yesterday that we just finally approved a drone model, and the new one's already out. So we've approved. We're sort of like NASA. NASA's always flying with 20-year-old computers because that's how long it takes to get them through the process.
Right. Well, I'm going to let you get back to getting that body cam video and keeping up with your own workflow today. I hope we can talk again before too long because so much to say on the subject of disrupting the news. So, Brendan Keefe, thank you so much for being here today, and do some good work this week.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Cheers.